Hello to everyone rooting for Africa. This is Roots and Roads Africa, your open door to the beauty, culture, and journeys that define the continent. Today on the Visit Desk, we explore how Togo is quietly reshaping African travel. Togo has just taken a powerful step, one that could reshape how we move across Africa. By dropping traditional visa restrictions and opening its doors to fellow Africans, Togo is tackling a massive barrier, a barrier that has stood for decades. For years, African countries have felt locked off from one another, so much so that it has often been easier for foreigners to visit Africa than it is for African citizens to travel across the continent themselves. But Togo's new system is a win for continental mobility. Instead of applying for a traditional visa, travelers now complete an online registration before traveling. It's proof that things are finally changing. The future of travel across Africa's borders is digital. Now, Togo may not dominate African tourism and travel headlines, but it represents something important, a movement toward a more connected and porous Africa. For citizens of ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, movement into Togo is already relatively seamless. Travelers from countries like Nigeria, Benin, Ghana, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire can move in Togo with minimal documentation under regional free movement agreements. These regional agreements remain the most practical form of travel freedom in Africa today. They stem from regional blocs even as the continent continues pushing towards broader continental integration. Let's look at how different parts of Africa compare. In West Africa, ECOWAS remains one of the continent's most established free movement systems. Its protocol allows citizens of member states to enter and stay in each other's countries visa-free for up to 90 days. All you need is a passport and in some cases, just a national ID. Over in East Africa, the East African Community, also known as Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, continues to deepen integration through its common market protocol. Citizens can travel using national IDs or passport, and the region has steadily worked towards smoother labor mobility and more harmonized immigration systems. Some initiatives, including regional tourist visa arrangements among select countries, have already improved movement, but full standardizations across all member states is still in progress. In Southern Africa, the Southern African Development Community (SADC) remains more fragmented. Yes, there is a protocol on the facilitation of movements of persons, but it has not been fully implemented as a region-wide free movement system. Instead, travel across SADC countries is still largely shaped by bilateral visa waiver agreements. That means mobility can differ significantly from one country pair to another. At the continental level, the African Union (AU) continues promoting long-term free movement through its Agenda 2063 vision and the African Passport Initiative. However, the African passport itself currently exists only as a diplomatic document issued to AU officials and selected elites. Meanwhile, the broader protocol on free movement of persons has been signed by a number of countries but ratified by only a few, meaning it is still not fully in force. So what does all this mean? Regional blocs like ECOWAS and the EAC are driving most of the real mobility gains today. Continental integration remains important, but still largely aspirational. For many African travelers, movement across the continent is still shaped more by regional agreements than by one unified African system. But regional agreements only tell part of the story. A growing number of countries are now rethinking not just whether visas should exist, but how the entire process of crossing a border should work. Instead of processing travelers at airports or border posts, governments are increasingly screening travelers online before they can even board a flight. The visa is slowly becoming digital authorization, and Togo is the latest country embracing that shift. Take Kenya. Kenya replaced many traditional visa requirements with an electronic travel authorization system commonly known as ETA. Travelers apply online before traveling, submitting passport details, accommodation information, and travel plans. Approval must be granted before boarding a flight. So while Kenya is often described as visa-free, the reality is more nuanced. Travel is easier, but it's still digitally pre-approved. Uganda uses a similar but distinct approach, a fully digital e-visa system for most international travelers. Instead of receiving a visa on arrival, visitors generally apply online through the government's immigration portal. They submit passport details, travel information, supporting documents, and visa fees electronically. Once approved, travelers receive a digital authorization letter to present upon arrival. Supporters say this makes visa processing more centralized and efficient. Critics argue that an e-visa is still a visa. Travelers must still navigate application fees and approval processes, barriers that can make movement across Africa less spontaneous and accessible. But within the East African community, movement into Uganda remains significantly simpler. Then there is Ghana. Rather than introducing full visa-free entry for all Africans, Ghana is rolling out a fee-free e-visa system for African passport holders. Travelers still apply online, submit documents, and receive approval before traveling, but they no longer pay visa fees. Ghanaian officials have repeatedly clarified that free visa does not mean visa-free. Security screening and pre-approval systems still remain in place. Now, the greatest progress still belongs to the countries that have dropped almost all formalities for fellow Africans. Benin offers visa-free entry for African nationals, making it one of the continent's most welcoming destinations for African travelers. The Gambia has embraced open access, quietly becoming one of West Africa's easiest entry points. Rwanda, one of Africa's strongest advocates for continental mobility, has built its visa-on-arrival system into a broader vision of positioning Kigali as a hub for African movement and business. And Seychelles, perhaps the most open of all, grants visitors a permit on arrival with minimal barriers. But even among these countries, open does not always mean unrestricted. Conditions can still vary depending on nationality, duration of stay, and digital requirements before travel. Africa's travel landscape is no longer defined by a simple question: visa or visa-free. The continent is entering a hybrid era. Some countries are fully open, others rely on visa-on-arrival systems. Many now require e-visas, digital registration, or electronic authorization before travel. And regional blocs continue shaping who can move freely and where. Which brings us back to Togo. Togo did not abolish the border. It moved it online. And in doing so, Togo joined a quiet but growing movement of African nations rethinking not just whether visas should exist, but what crossing a border even looks like in the digital age. The future of African travel will not be stamped in a passport. It will be approved on a screen. And slowly, the rest of Africa is following. This is Roots and Roads Africa, exploring Africa through the roads we take, cultures we carry, and the connections we make. Subscribe for more stories from across the continent.